Again, good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to this talk. My name is Roderick Parker, and it's my pleasure on behalf of Leeds Civic Trust to introduce you to this talk given by Dr. Rachael Unsworth called Leeds, Cradle of Innovation. Rachael was originally going to give a talk with this title as part of the opening ceremony for the Heritage Open Days last year, but the whole ceremony, along with many other ceremonies across the nation, was cancelled because of the death of the Queen the previous day. So the Leeds Civic Trust is very grateful to Rachael for giving a revised and updated version of her talk this afternoon. Again, as I've said before, if you have any questions during the talk, could you put them in the chat function, and we'll try and cover those questions en bloc at the end of the talk. So may I just pass this over to Rachael? You can see her first slide on the screen already. I'll pass over to her, and let's listen to Leeds, Cradle of Innovation.
Thank you. As Roderick said, this isn't going to be the talk that I would have given in September. Cities don't stand still, and that was a particular occasion and setting, and we would have had specific people in the audience connected with some of the innovators. So anyway, I thought I would move on and do a different version of it. And I'm not going to be able, you'll be glad to know, to give you all the details. I'm going to try to draw some lessons from it and give an overview and think about how what we learned from the book helps us to think about the future of Leeds and other places where you might be involved, as I guess there may be some people from beyond Leeds. So when I come to a point that wasn't within the book itself, and innovations that have arisen since the book was published back in 2018, it's going to have this white background instead of the black background. So it's fairly clear badging of material that's been added as this forward-looking element of it. I'm a geographer, not a historian. I'm interested in how cities change in the long term, the deep past. I don't have a particular period, though it's more fascinating as things thicken up and speed up in the 18th century into the 19th century. But I'm also interested in what makes cities tick in the present day and how they're facing up or not to the challenges of the future. The idea for the book bubbled up way back in 2016 when Steve Burt, local historian, and our friend David Lum, an architect, thought that it would be great to bring together stories about our innovators, many of whom are not familiar enough, even within the city, let alone beyond it. And so this idea was for showing off about the city. It was all done within Leeds, designed, printed, bound within Leeds. And we were very grateful to many local firms and individuals for sponsoring us, and organisations such as the Civic Trust, which is there in the middle of the list of sponsors. And this is what it looks like. Many of you will have seen copies of it. I'm afraid we haven't got more than a handful left because we mainly distributed it through the sponsors and time has gone on. I would like eventually for this to be a digital resource, and we'll hope to achieve that eventually, with the pages not flashing past quite so quickly. So it has three big sections after an introduction about the notion of innovation itself. And this is what we call spirits of innovation. These are historic innovators, and a great range here from some people from just before the industrial period. So great John Smeaton, who we're going to make a big fuss about from the middle of this year and into next year when it's 300 years since his birth, and Joseph Priestley, scientist, but then so many people associated with the industrialization, but also these folk, I'll come on to mention the people who didn't innovate in the sense of industry, but actually helped to clear up some of the mess and deal with the things that hadn't been addressed. Then the central section, Leeds Legends, is organizations and companies and institutions that have been around for a very long time and are still going, apart from a section called Giants of the Past, which on reflection should have been a special section in Spirits, but never mind. These are organizations with a very long life and with lessons to learn from that long life and the way they still manage to survive. And then the trickiest of all was the vast task of summarizing contemporary innovators across such a wide range of different elements of the city's life. And indeed, culture ended up being the fattest bit of this section of the book. And that itself incredibly varied within. And with all of this, I'm extremely grateful to people who contributed their material or let me come and interview them if they're alive and kicking. We drew on blue plaque text and many of the profiles that Eve Bradford had developed over the years for they lived in Leeds. And Mick McCann, who had just recently published a book about what Leeds gave the world, and Matt Edgar, who let us draw on his very interesting profile of Matthew Murray. So loads of people contributed. This is why I say co-editor and project manager, because there was much more than writing, and not all the writing was mine. So the meaning of innovation, we took a very broad view of this. It wasn't just clever kit and eureka moments, and it wasn't just what, but how. So much of it was about changes in processes, ways of doing things. And as I mentioned already, you know, dealing with the market failures and sometimes managing to turn problems into opportunities. I mean, you could say that Soapy Joe taking the byproduct of one industry, same with Brotherton, you know, taking a byproduct, a waste product, and turning that into a saleable product. That's the, you know, fantastic innovation. Less sexy and dramatic than some, but still really counts. And then there's the creativity that's less directly functional, but I argue is still an absolutely essential part of the whole story. Very clearly, it's not just about the application of scientific principles. Unfortunately, I met Jill Cookson while I was preparing the book, and she published her book just a few months before Cradle of Innovation. And her very strong thesis is all about the folk with the precursors of the Industrial Revolution, without whom it couldn't have happened. So these people engaged in the age-old crafts of being millwrights and cartwrights and blacksmiths and whitesmiths, that's people who work with tin and so on, locksmiths, carriage makers, clockmakers and carpenters, joiners and so on. And they were the people who enabled the first industrialists to do what they did, and had to learn new skills and new applications of those skills along the way. And so one of the first things that had to be done was overcome the pinch points in traditional methods. When Benjamin Gott took on the field at Beaning and decided to bring all the processes of wool and cloth making under one set of roofs, he didn't mechanize it all immediately, but his idea was gradually to apply modern principles to these 30-odd processes and to make it all faster, more efficient, to be able to scale up in a way that simply hadn't been possible, with everything scattered across the countryside and done by hand methods. So this is a story that involves so many different kinds of skills, and a few people are known for the contribution that they made, but behind them are a lot more folk. Innovation, I say, isn't always that eureka moment. So Smeaton, the famous civil engineer, you know, he was building on the mill technology of his era and making improvements that then led on to more. Murray understood enough about the Bolton and Watt engine to make it more efficient than when it left the factory in Birmingham. This curious corrugated flue enabled our merchant and royal navies to zip around the world faster than anyone else's. Clifford Albert, a very renowned physician at the Leeds General Infirmary, took the existing long stem thermometer, cumbersome, slow acting, and managed to invent one that was much neater and quicker to react. So it speeded up ward rounds and enabled, quicker diagnosis. And then we've got the amazing Marsden with his stone crusher. You don't get much more heavy industry than that, do you? And then what were these people like? Well, when we look across the whole amazing, diverse array of people, we can say that they shared many characteristics. So these things crop up again and again. They were often, slightly edgy folk who just wouldn't go with what had gone before. But they worked blooming hard. It isn't as if they sat in a bath and, suddenly they had an idea and then their life was easy. Many of them worked phenomenally hard to get their idea to fruition. And this is still the case. And, they go through all sorts of incredible trials by fire, disease, and all sorts of setbacks, and up against the orthodoxy of their times, and very hard to break through into a new way of doing things. This sign, by the way, that you might recognize from the side of the Leeds Playhouse, as it now is a quote from a very well received album by Chumbawamba back in 1997 from their album Tub Thumper. They were based in Leeds from the early 80s, and I thought it was very appropriate. So yes, we also find that the complementary mentalities and skills, often the person who's the entrepreneur, Marshall, like Gott, happened to have an education, happened to have money, and they were able then to invest. And alongside them, they had technical people. Murray then went on to become an entrepreneur in his own right. Sorry, I'll just go back, Murray. And then he took on a chap who had capital, Fenton, and Mr. Wood, who was very good with the books and kept everything ticking over, while Murray was then able to concentrate on the machine making. Fowler, the marvelous Quaker, who was so motivated to try to bring more land into cultivation and to do it more efficiently, and invented the steam plough, the cumbersome machine that seems incredible now, but it was an instant hit. And he equally had a bunch of folk around him who enabled this to happen. The McLaren brothers were very much a chalk and cheese partnership. Marx, the Goey Jewish immigrant who was the great entrepreneur, and Spencer, the steady bookkeeper whom he met here in Leeds, and such a long history there. And to bring it right up to the present day, Laura Wellington, a graphics artist, and her partner who's a photographer. And Laura is very much the voice of the business, and James does so much behind the scenes, well, as does Laura, of course, but they are very different personalities, complementary. And then Alan Black, who put together the sound and the music on jukeboxes, also teamed up with somebody who was much more outgoing and helped to build the business. And then the Together for Peace team, we could, so many partnerships like this that we can point to. Including these winemakers at Leaventhorpe, one with practical application for out in the vineyards, the partner a chemist and deals with the marketing and so on. But these named partners at the top of businesses are not alone. So here we see this famous picture of women tumbling out of at the time when this picture was done, newly built Temple Works down in Holbeck. Most of them, you notice, women and children still at that time. And although Marshall was seen as one of the more enlightened employers, there's still incredible long hours of work, hardship in this mill building here. Which, by the way, just on the topic of disasters and what happened to various people in conjunction with Heritage Open Days, another victim of, well, I shouldn't put it like that, but another event that had to be cancelled was the reopening of Ditherington Mills in Shrewsbury, which was a sister business to the Marshall's flax spinning business here. And the old Ditherington Mill from the late 18th century is still there. But they don't have much in the way of contents. And so the pictures from Marshall's Mill here in Leeds were used as part of the displays down there. Anyway, worth going to see if you're in Shropshire. Very dramatic, amazing building that's been beautifully renovated. One of the people who was in the right place at the right time. The older Kitson, this is his son, also called James Kitson, surrounded by his workforce. James Kitson the elder happened to come into business in the 1830s to start making engines, just at the beginning of the era that he would help to create of the railway age. And the engine making area of Hunslet, not only making railway engines, but for mines and quarries and plantations and so on, exported all over the world. And by the way, you know, Matthew Murray, that initiator of the locomotive, didn't live to see the railway age. And I'll mention him near the end. Burton's, this is actually the first picture in the book, is this sea of seamstresses in the works at Hudson Road, because I was determined, and Steve Burt, my co-author, we were both determined that it wouldn't just be a tale of successful men, that we had to pay homage to the thousands of people who'd made this possible. At the time of the peak of Burton's works, just before the Second World War, there were said to be 10,000 people working in the business. And some of the businesses are still going, very few still in textiles and clothing. But here on the right, you've got the example of Hainsworth's down at Stanningley Bottom. And some of the characteristics that we find that help to keep things going are these qualities that are very hard to measure, very hard to pin down, but are very much about understanding what's going on in your own business, but what's going on in the wider world, what's coming over the horizon, where the new opportunities are, how markets are changing. And while keeping costs down are important, you have to keep developing new products or changing your products to bring them forward into the changing environment. And that not only the hard skills, but also the soft skills, and this increasingly important phenomenon of teamwork. Nowadays, we're less about leaders and then, you know, just an undifferentiated shop floor, and much more about understanding that we have to have a varied team with a range of skills and strengths. And then always having an eye to the export market. When I went to interview Adam Hainsworth out at Stanningley, he had to cut off the interview and leave me with his very able team, and because he was off to sell coffins to the Dutch. And it was equally difficult to get hold of Peter Vickers from Vickers Oils, because he was always out of the country. This was Peter Vickers' ancestor, Mary Vickers, left a widow. Often women involved in industry in those days before some aspects of emancipation had occurred, it was a widow or somebody who was left, you know, as the only member of the family to take over the business. Mary Vickers, whose son went into a different line of work in oils for the textile industry initially, and then into lubrication for ships, extraordinary, and still based here in the middle of Leeds. And their values, which Peter spelled out at a meeting when he went to India back in 2018. And these are, you know, timeless values, really. And they're Methodists still, and very concerned that they take a long-term view, not just thinking about the last quarter, the next quarter. And by the way, thinking of the long-term relationships, this is a bill from Vickers to Hainsworth back in the 19th century. I think it was settled. And there are the 6 generations now. I understand that Peter's son William has been persuaded to come on board. And what a responsibility to take this business forward into the 21st century. And just on that topic of value, you might have been quite surprised when you heard Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, talking in 2020 about financial value having been rather overblown as a concern compared with other kinds of value. And that these crises that we're in, financial and in terms of public health and climate, is it partly because we've got the wrong end of the stick on value? Now, one of the elements of Leeds that we can point to, and you could say that there's a story like this anywhere where there's a concentration of economic, social, cultural activity, is this notion of an ecosystem of innovation, where the more that is going on, the more chance there is of more happening. And it draws in more workforce, more entrepreneurs. I mean, just as Murray had been encouraged to come down here, hearing that Marshall was trying to experiment with new ways of spinning, and you know, between them they started things off down here in the very cradle of innovation down here in Holbeck. And here's Gott's Mill out on the western side. But Leeds still a very small place, but growing incredibly rapidly and picking up entrepreneurs and workforce at pace. So it never grew faster than between 1811 and 1831 in terms of percentage growth of population. During the 18th century, it had become an increasingly intense hub of the trading of wool and cloth. And then we started on with the manufacturing era. So, but still such a small place physically, crammed full of people and activity, but still physically small. And this quote from Bert and Grady that came out in the year that I arrived in Leeds as a geography lecturer, I've always thought was very vivid. So this is now only 35 years after that 1815 map, the extent of which is shown by this orange line. And you can see how much more building there was. Accommodation needed for the workforce, for new businesses, all pretty chaotic. Before there was stringent legislation on how buildings should be put up, on what could be where, and now with the addition of the all-important railways. The first line had been Murray's Railway, the Brandlings of Middleton Colliery Railway, with Murray's locomotive bringing the coals from 1812 right into the middle of Leeds, and then Marsh Lane and Middleton, and the Midland Railway here, and then two railways here, stations here, and another station here. So a very busy and prosperous place, but always with ups and downs, always with people trying to minimize costs, maximize profits, maximize what they got out of the workforce, and a great deal of hardship along the way. But now, while so much squalor, misery, and very unremarkable buildings being put up, there were also some extremely grand ones. Now, we didn't include Cuthbert Broderick, who did this picture of his creation, Leeds Town Hall. We didn't include him or other architects because, I won't go into it now, but quite difficult to make a case for architects actually being innovative as such. But this phenomenon of making a town hall certainly was, you know, up there as a pioneering effort, along with other towns who were doing similar kinds of things, but all sorts of new scales of activity and new ways of funding had to be found. So this man, John Deacon Heaton, was very much in the forefront of the arguments for doing the Grand Town Hall in Leeds. And I've just put up there all his credentials just to show you how very involved he was in the town. You know, he was a physician first and foremost in his profession, but he was so much more besides. And this notion of people really connected into economies and society and the culture of the place, I think, is not quite as strong as it used to be, even though we're a much bigger city than the town of the middle of the 19th century. By the way, buildings on the corner of East Parade have just been demolished as part of a development scheme. So briefly, we've got the same view almost that Broderick was able to paint all those years ago. That's I just took yesterday. So that town hall was made in a circumstance of very rapid growth and change in the nature of industry, diversification. I mean, this is very much set out in Burton Grady's book, The Illustrated History of Leeds. So many different activities going on. So while in the 1790s, it was estimated there were about 150 lines of work in Leeds, by the 1830s, there were twice as many. By the end of the 19th century, you know, so much more diverse again. So here, maybe you recognise this is Fairbairn and Lawson's engineering works. This is the leather market down south of the river. This is Alf Cook's print works. This is Hepworth's warehouse down on Wellington Street, and much more besides. And all that success, yes, at a price. So as I've already mentioned, but it bears bringing out even more vividly the circumstances within which these successes were derived, the exploitation that occurred of resources, of people, of land. And the women still very much in the background for the most part. And yet some enlightened folk, like the great but little known James Hole of Leeds, Mr. Hole, did apply themselves to all sorts of reforms in all these areas, and many of the pioneering acts of Parliament for national change in these areas were either brought about directly because of work here in Leeds, or people in Leeds contributed massively to bringing those through. And they also, as well as creating lots of problems that needed to be cleared up, some of them did do their civic duty. So there were philanthropists amongst them, and often they took their turn as a councillor, became an alderman, took their turn as mayor. And so this Henry Rowland Marsden, the stone-crushing man, you know, he was deemed worthy after his sudden death at a not very great age of having a statue, which has been shunted off to Woodhouse Moor, actually. But so this question of, you know, who gets honoured, who gets remembered for what they do, is quite an interesting one, isn't it? And we've had our attention drawn to that vividly since this book was published. I just want to do a little side mention of an idea about trying to encourage more people to come forward to do civic engagement. What about, instead of having national service for those years between school and university or college, you might go and contribute towards not just doing something litter picking and menial tasks, but actually be involved in data gathering and in ideas for how to, you know, prevent littering in the first place, come up with the campaigns that are going to encourage behaviour change, for instance. Go and try out different areas of work that you might then want to go on to experience more fully later in life through your studies and then professionally. So I don't know whether there's a chance of pioneering that here, but I do think it might help. It would bring people into the workforce at an early stage. Some might then not go to university, but many might go on and then study at a higher level in a topic that they hadn't envisaged. So we'll see whether anybody picks up on that one. Now, I just want to come back to the women reformers. This is just a small handful of the names of people, and we don't have many photographs of these women or portraits of them, but they were just so energetic and determined, and you know, knew some of them that they weren't going to have success even within their lifetime on the matter of women's suffrage, for instance, but they knew that eventually, you know, the arc of the future would result in these things coming to fruition. So, by the way, look, Leonora Cohen, yes, the dates are right. She lived to actually 104. We're going to have an event in the Leeds Ville and Lit this summer on her 150th birthday in the middle of June. And so I hope you might join us for that. Michael Meadowcroft is going to talk about her. He actually interviewed her back in the 70s when she was a very old lady. So there's a connection there with a woman who'd been born 150 years ago. One of the great pioneers, she wasn't here for very long, but we do like to borrow her because she practiced here in Leeds, and she was the first woman to practice as a doctor. The Leeds Civic Trust plaque was put up just in 2021, actually, in Park Square, there where she had her practice. And she was very concerned with ministering for the health needs of the poor, and campaigning on many of these other matters that short list of women had been involved in for so many years. Another person who was a pioneer of medical practice in a different way was Robert Baker. I should have put his dates up there, I'm sorry, but he was the town surgeon, so-called, which meant you were the doctor for the people who couldn't afford to go to private practitioners. And he was town surgeon at the time when the cholera first hit Leeds in 1832. And his pioneering work was the beginnings of epidemiology, of mapping the incidence both of poor housing and of the outbreak of disease and its severity, and showing that there was a very strong link between the two. It was some years later before John Snow showed categorically that the source was contaminated water. But the mapping as a way of drawing attention to this correlation was done here in Leeds at first. And I think Robert Baker is somebody who needs to be more strongly remembered. Medical science within the hospitals, these just a few of the people who deserve a mention. So many different branches of their profession exemplified here, and including Simon Kay, who has a world first of doing a hand transplant. Amazing. So many of these things, either the first in this country or the first anywhere in the world. And through the 20th century, these expanding professions and far more people going into higher education, opening up so many more opportunities, but also the toppling of many of those giants of the past. While there are still some niche engineering firms, and we have a medical tech writ large in this city, there are far fewer big factories than there used to be, and we're still on with regenerating the areas where they used to be. So just a very quick overview here of national stats on the change in the balance of the different elements of the economy. And you can see those coloured bands, even if it's hard to read the little words there, but you can see very much a diminution in industry and an expansion in the service sector. So here are stats to go with it. And while in those years there was an average of 13.8, there's now twice that since the turn of the millennium. So a very different kind of economy, needing different accommodation, and spread over a much wider area. So we've broken beyond the boundaries of so many things, including the boundaries of the city. This area, this little rectangle in the middle, that's the area that was covered by those old maps that I showed you. And now we're going to zoom in on the city, and the coloured patches here, this is from an interactive development map. So it shows you all the sites where there has been recent development, or there are schemes in the pipeline or underway at the moment. And we're just going to home in on the South Bank, which is where I first met David Lum and Steve Burt properly when we formed the Leeds Sustainable Development Group, thinking about the future of this area in particular after the financial crash. And you can see that now this is the latest version of this map. There's a great deal going on. Much has changed in the recent past. Now, whether this thing, HS2, will ever happen is another matter, but it's still there on the planning map, just in case. So beyond 1,000 trades, so many categories. And I honestly used to wake up in the night going hot and cold thinking, oh my goodness, what if we've missed out somebody absolutely crucial? I tried to talk to as many folk as I possibly could and really stress tested who we'd included. And all we could do for so many categories was to give an overview and then give some examples. We couldn't hope to be comprehensive. But the very first woman to appear in this section is the aforementioned Laura Wellington. I thought it should be a woman, given that men featured very strongly in the spirits of innovation of the past. And you can see there, just that small sample there, how many different kinds of innovation we were covering. So much of this is now not only about digital innovation, but digital as the latest infrastructure to enable all sorts of other things to happen. So whereas we've had investment in the navigation, the turnpikes, the railways, and then in my view, somewhat erroneously, but I suppose it was inevitable, in roads, we have now got this extraordinary, almost invisible investment in the digital, which enables people to start up businesses with very small outlay. So for instance, my tiny little business as a tour guide, you know, I was able to set up a website and get up and, if not running, then walking quite quickly. And it enables people to collaborate so much more easily, as we found, you know, in that very difficult time in 2020. AQL is one of the hubs of this, with Adam Beaumont at his curious old chapel down in just the top of Hunslet. Now the data centre for the north of England. All your messages to go and get your latest vaccination will have come through there. The Netflix that you watched during lockdowns, and much more besides. And we are the main focus for NHS Digital. They're now in the Wellington Place offices. Although how many folk are actually at their desks now is another matter. So this is one of the points that the future of cities, how are we going to regenerate in ways that are going to take account of new ways of living and working. The university is still going strong, and this is the diagram that they wanted us to include in the book, and I wasn't able to do justice to the amazing array of breakthrough ideas and more that have come out of the university. But we just gave a small selection where there was material already, it had been researched, frankly. And I was hoping to do a follow-up book on the university, specialising on the university. Would have been great. Anyway, you'll see that health is one of the major topics in this outer level, and that data links them all together. So many elements of work that the people who initiated the Yorkshire College of Science back in the 1870s couldn't have imagined. I hope we're going to make a big fuss about this next year when it'll be 150 years since the foundation of the Yorkshire College of Science. A big fuss has been made about the Braggs, father and son, who won the Nobel Prize for their insights on X-ray crystallography. And there's a new artwork on the end of a building that has been remade to take a new collective of scientific work going on in the university now. And another pair of Nobel Prize winners from 1952, whose work on chromatography helped again to move on the work in the long story of DNA. But it's not just about Nobel Prize winners. You know, there are so many folk who are not as internationally recognized, but who've made amazing contributions, both locally and nationally and internationally. Just a couple of things, you know, from a well-established company that was a spin out from the university, and they're working now on all sorts of incredible innovations. Tissue regenics, you know, doing these things that enable people to have a new lease of life. And COVID-19 research, so many universities involved, of course. And here our professor of civil engineering, who thought she was tucked away in a rather unremarkable area of mechanical engineering as an expert in ventilation. And she's been involved in this rapid piece of work on understanding more about how the air circulates in enclosed spaces. So very interesting how crises then generate innovation. Here we've got another one about applied medical science. Another one involving the process of taking breath. And all of this with great implications for the way that the city reconfigures. You see, this is just one photograph. This is not a compilation photograph. I happened to catch this sign as it was saying, you know, the Arcadia Group goes bust. That was what was left of Burton's, by the way, And it was just seemed to be emblematic to me of the, retail was already changing substantially, and this was shifted at an even greater pace during the pandemic. What is going to happen to city centres? Well, footfall obviously fell very significantly. It's coming back, but one of the areas of innovation is to have more of the kind of screening and non-acute services within the main central business district, rather than people having to go to hospitals or clinics. So for when it's about wellness, well-being, then more of this kind of thing on the high street. This is just one example. What about the future of universities after the pandemic? Well, it seems that there's still a great appetite for people to come together to study and to have a fun time as young folk, and the campus still abuzz. But how much longer will we still have lectures in person? Who knows? But we certainly still have a need for research and for teaching, and it'll be a case of rejigging the balance between in-person and online. There's also a need for the research, as we've seen in many of these examples, to stretch beyond the campus in terms of its applications. This was an old, from when I was doing the book, a picture showing the notion of an innovation district. This in itself has actually moved on. And the Nexus that opened just back in 2019 is now at the north end of, it's just up here, just by the inner ring road, at the north end of this notion of an innovation arc. And I've just been working with the City Council regeneration team, who have put forward a draft special planning document, trying to draw attention to all the opportunities that there are for improving connectivity, both physically and functionally, between the universities, 3 of them up here, including the Arts University, the hospitals area, the civic area, and then the commercial area down here that includes also some education facilities, now that some of those are being taken over by other learning institutions, and then right down eventually to making links over into Holbeck. I mean, I have an idea, a crazy idea. Why couldn't we have some kind of cable car link right over all those old bits of infrastructure, the actual river? The navigation doesn't start till down here, but the river, the canal, the railways, and enable people to get easily to and fro, whereas now it's a bit of a, you have to do a walk around to get there. Who knows whether that could ever happen? Yeah, sorry, there's Nexus up there. And so, yes, we definitely need greater connectivity through this whole area, and improved spaces as well as means of getting to and fro. So a very integrated set of ideas, and I know that the Civic Trust has been involved, and indeed Martin Hamilton came on one of the tours that I led as part of the formal consultation process. So part of that, the South End would be the amazing temple works that I've mentioned, and the next phase of this, lift the lid on that incredible roof, might be we hope to be the northern reading room and venues, event space for the British Library. So we'll hope that comes to fruition within our lifetimes. They're on with work on the counting house on the northern side of this great room that was the biggest room in the world, they say, at the time of its building in the late 1830s. And the work on the accounting house is involving apprentices learning skills on traditional building skills, but also that will be useful elsewhere for bringing forward other heritage buildings into 21st century use. And that's being overseen by people from CEG, who are now the owners of this site and many more sites down in Holbeck. On the other side of the South Bank, we've got the Climate Innovation District, which is going forward apace. I took this picture from my friend's house just at Landing Place, looking over the navigation to the Solar Avenue on the other side, which is now fully inhabited, and there are more phases to come over the other side of the river, including, well, there's a workspace has already come out of the ground, and there is going to be primary school in conjunction with a place for more senior residents. I'm wondering if I might make it down there one of these days. Now, we need more of this. We need more thoroughly sustainable ways of leading our lives in passive house standard dwellings and with all the facilities that we need within walking or cycling distance. We have a few green enterprises and innovations to show off about in the book, but not enough, sadly. And here's the energy from waste plant in East Leeds that's also during lockdown they were going ahead with putting in some of the heat network. So using the waste heat, they generate electricity, but they also have heat to spare, and so some of the pipes for that were going in during lockdown. But we need a lot more of this kind of far-sighted, determined approach to reducing resource throughput, closing loops, doing more with less, growing only the areas of the economy where we're not going to do more damage to the environment, and exploit folk as well, and share out the proceeds thereof. And Our Future Leeds is the collective of people who've got a significant amount of funding to try to make these things happen now at scale. The funding came through a couple of years ago, and they're now working on trying to stimulate activities around communities in the city. And some of this is cultural activity, bringing the stories of how we need to move forward in all sorts of areas into cultural performance and visual art and so on. These are some historic examples, but you can imagine all sorts of ways. I'm not gifted in this respect, but we can enliven the notion of all the opportunities there are to turn our economy and society towards net zero so much more quickly if we also see this as part of our creativity. So yes, these are just a handful of examples. There's just so much going on now in the city. We were strong on performing arts quite a while back in the 20th century, but now so much stronger on the visual arts as well. And I wonder if the spirit of some of the Black pioneers in Leeds, if that could really come to the fore in a more significant way, we could have even more happening. I just wanted to draw attention to our definition of culture in the book. It's that a city's culture in its broadest meaning is its sense of itself. It is the very fabric of society. The arts are the embroidery. The patterns have grown more varied, colourful and engaging over recent decades. And Peter Watson, who wrote a magisterial, incredible book about the whole of the 20th century, says, fiction, imagination, the world of enchantment, at its best, gives some order to the chaos that our intelligence perceives. It evokes shared feelings and toleration, raising aspirations onto a higher plane. So I wonder, could all children have dancing lessons like the lucky children at Hare Hills Middle School back in the middle of the 20th century? Could all children have music lessons and art lessons? We seem to be going the wrong way on these things. And what role is there for the many grassroots groups, and like those who are featured in the section of the book called Arts for the People, and in doing things differently? So we're doing culture big time at the moment, despite being ousted from the competition learn at EU level. Leeds decided to do it anyway. I know that quite a few of you on here now will be in this picture. There's me at the top of the second two. And we've just started to let culture loose with the launch at the beginning of the month. And I hope that this will move us forward in all sorts of ways and really inspire a load of folk to get involved and to start new enterprises of various kinds. But this is all part of making a place really livable. When we can do anything anywhere, the place where we happen to be has to be somewhere where we want to be. And this is a phrase from an American thinker, Mr. Kunstler. Here. And so the quality of our spaces, places, dwellings, workplaces really matters, even though we could be anywhere. And we're making headway. but there's so much more to do, including on the South Bank. There was a notion for a park from some time ago. It's now actually happening. We've already got the bit on this side in Sovereign Square. The bridge is about to be open any minute, I hope, connecting into the green space here, and then the developments on the old Tetley site will be in a green setting, and it'll come right through to, this is where Alf Cook's works were down in Hunslet here. And the whole area will be more greened with extra tree planting and so on. 6,000 extra trees have gone into the city centre as part of the latest street works and public realm works. This was our idea in the Sustainable Development Group about making the South Bank a sustainable neighbourhood for the long term. And it would have helped if we'd really got to grips with this thoroughly back in 2010. There are some good things happening, but perhaps not as joined up as they might be, shall we say. But now there's the ironworks, long awaited as the latest phase of the round foundry redevelopments. That was looking down from the top of Globe Point the other day as the weather peeled back. And this is looking down over the next phase of their development, which is where Marshall had his first works on this very site just down here. There are going to be some quite tall buildings. There's going to be a tower just here. I wonder about the wisdom of having very tall towers, but this is not the place to talk about that. But can we be then digital and sustainable and inclusive? This document is a very interesting read, trying to bring together so many different aspects of looking at the future. The whole question of the rate at which we consume energy and what kind of energy has come so much more into focus in these last months, hasn't it? I'm sitting here in positively Victorian conditions at a very low temperature. I wouldn't be using the boiler very much anyway, but it's given up entirely. I'm hoping to get a replacement this week. But ideally, you know, we shouldn't be going for replacement. We should be going for a whole new era of technology. Could we build back better? There was a lot of this phrase, wasn't there? The optimism of could we use this discontinuity as a way of doing things differently? And this was an example. I just happened to pass on my way into town one day, trying to cut down on through traffic. We're doing that in the city centre. We're doing this in neighbourhoods, trying to come to the notion of 15-minute neighbourhoods or 20-minute neighbourhoods at least, where people can live, work and do everything without having to use a car. Would be so much better for so many of us if only we could have that level of vision. And helping with so many aspects of well-being are these incredible social entrepreneurs, many of whom have been going for a lot of years already. This is the chap in the middle here is Alan, Slunglow Alan, theatre director and so much more. And during the pandemic, doing food distribution and entertainment, socially distanced, of course, in the yard outside their place down in Holbeck. Holbeck, still a place of innovation. And during the pandemic, these entrepreneurs recognizing that there's a new phenomenon of the e-scooter, whatever you think of them, you know, we've got to sort out some difficulties, but it's one way of enabling young people to access education and apprenticeships and jobs more widely, isn't it? I know that there's a lot of having fun as well, but, you know, we have to think about how we can deal with the problems, not ban things that might be useful, I think. So still a hotbed of innovation down here. And that's where Manfrith Electric are, by the way. And at the end of the book, we bring together the notion of the more physical sciences with the creativity on the more artistic side, and this wonderful word about putting art into STEM, where you get STEAM, and we come right back to square one with Murray and his engine. And Peter Watson, whom I've mentioned, his history of ideas in the 20th century. And he's saying about needing not to divide up arts and the sciences. He says that it's only by understanding people as members of groups that we can hope to solve problems and how we relate to each other. There has already been great pioneering work in the university, bringing scientists together with people in the Cultural Institute, to try and think differently outside the box, as they will insist on saying. So yes, this book, A Terrible Beauty, I do recommend it, but it's a long read. And it's too big to carry around. It was my breakfast table read for several months. So back to the great 1815 map, which is round my neck as well. Part of that map down in Holbeck. This is with the overlay in bright orange, which is also on this map, and showing you the continuity as well as the great changes between the beginnings of the Cradle of Innovation and nowadays. And good old Matthew Murray, that father of mechanical engineering, who doesn't have a prominent work of art to draw attention to him in the city centre. There's that plaque down on Water Lane. There's the great obelisk in St Matthew's Churchyard. I don't know how many of you have even seen those, but I think that we ought to get our act together and at least by the end of this year of culture, have an idea of what we do. I would love it to be a kinetic artwork that attaches to the idea of Murray having taken the stationary steam engine and turned it into a locomotive. And maybe it could be on that great big apron area outside of the station that's been created. If it met the earth very neatly and didn't get in the way and was very eye-catching, that would be a suitable emblem, I think, of his contribution, and would show the city also moving on beyond the amazing but so damaging era of carbon-dependent industry. So our conclusions. It's all about connections, isn't it? Connectivity. And about having long-term vision, not giving up. And so, you know, I learned so much personally from this, writing the conclusion to the book. It really did flow from all the lessons that I'd learned from reading about and talking to people involved in innovation in so many different fields. And so my reinvention was as a tour guide. And I'm going to offer, it'll be just a couple of days before I disappear to help my American daughter. It'll be the Sunday morning in the middle of February. And I hope maybe some of you will be inspired to join me for a walk around the Cradle of Innovation. And I'm planning to do little old Holbeck as well, not just the bit that folk know about, the Round Foundry and where Marshall had his works, but also to go more widely in that area. And before that, I'm going to be doing a tour of the College of Science, I was going to call it, the University of Leeds, on the Sunday morning, the 5th of February. And I will be putting up some more tour topics, but I'm also doing a lot of private tours now, so there's a limit to how many public ones I can do. But if you subscribe to my website, then you'll be notified when I put up a new tour. It'll ping through and say, want to come on one of Leeds City Walking Tours outings? But I don't send loads of emails to people. Don't worry, you won't get pestered with loads of emails. So that's it. And I hope